Let's talk about bucks, because this is often what drives the conversation with this. If we take a look at total buck harvest across the U.S., who do you think led the country in buck harvest? Texas. Very good. They did about 250,000 bucks. Michigan was second. Alabama, Wisconsin were third. Now I'll show you this not to give you the actual numbers here because they are less meaningful than if we look at the age structure of those harvests. In Texas, even though they led the country, fortunately only 28% of those bucks were yearlings. In Michigan, unfortunately, 63% were yearlings. And Alabama, Wisconsin, East were right there about 50%. And this is really a good place to be, eventually. They're saving half or the majority of their yearling bucks. And that's a good thing because if we can save at least half of those yearling bucks, we can get those to 2 years old. And quality deer management is not about getting them out there to 5. Quality deer management is saying, let's balance our deer urban habitat, and let's have a good age structure of bucks and does on both sides of that. So let's protect the yearlings. If we do that, because we know that a yearling buck is the easiest adult deer in the woods to kill, particularly during the rut of the year. If we can just protect them as yearlings and get them to 2, go ahead and start shooting them at 2. But some of them will slip through and become 3-year-olds. Some will slip through and become 4 and 5. And pretty soon we'll have a full age structure. And there's a lot of really good things that happen to that deer herd because of that. And I'll talk more about that in my other talk. But that's a good place to be. So at least with this, even though they harvest a lot of bucks, they're doing a nice job saving about 50% of it. Well, about this same time period, we can take a look at harvest records. And I'm not a big loaded crocker or poking yarn record but fanatic by any means, but at least it's a measure to see, to gauge what do we have from an age structure out there and how this changes. If we take a look at this period and fast forward 5 years, we see that the number of record book entries in both has increased over 40%. Now certainly some of this can be related to habitat quality. You have people improving habitat now and doing a better job with forest management and cover and food plots and all that to get deer more to eat, so that plays into that. But by far the biggest reason that you see this is because you're just shifting deer into some of these older age classes, not harvesting so many yearlings anymore. Well, let's take a look at yearling harvest trends and see how this fits in. And from our perspective, this is a good measure of the spread of the QDM philosophy, because this is why a lot of people first start changing or wanting to change the way they hunt deer or manage deer. It comes back to these yearling bucks. And if we look at it across the country, in 99, this is an adult buck harvest of 1.5 and older bucks. In 1999, about 51% of those were yearling bucks. 5 years later, or 6 years later, they had dropped to about 45%. So the national average now is less than 50%, which is an encouraging thing. If we take a look at specific states, in the Northeast, Pennsylvania reduced their harvest of yearlings the most, from about 80 down to 52. In the Midwest, Wisconsin reduced theirs the most, from 68 down to 51. And in the South, Mississippi reduced theirs. Actually, they have a nationwide low of 12%. Only 12% of their adult buck harvest are yearlings. Now, if we look at the flip side of that, of who's harvesting the highest percentage of the yearlings, Michigan and Minnesota and New Jersey and New York have the highest percent at over 60%. The good news is, at least that's not the 80% like Pennsylvania used to have, but it is above that 50% guideline, and it is above the national average. Well, obviously, if we're saving yearlings, then their percentage of 2-year-olds is going to increase, and it did from 20 to 32. But miraculously, in some of these states, we can look at Maryland doubled the percentage of 2.5-year-old bucks that they were shooting without any regulations. This is all voluntary by their sportsmen. Nebraska nearly doubled, and I'm going to throw in my home state of Pennsylvania here. They went from 20 to 48, which was more than double. But I have an asterisk by that because in Pennsylvania, they only break their age structure down into fawn yearlings of 2.5 plus. So they don't go any farther. So they went from 20%, 2.5 plus to 48%. Now some people say, Greg, you can do all this that you want with percentages. What does that mean in real numbers? Well, in Pennsylvania, it meant that they went from shooting about 39,000 bucks that met this age category to 58,000, which from a hunting perspective is a tremendous jump. So yes, we see an increase percentage-wise, but we also realize a huge jump in actual numbers of bucks. And the last category then with the 3.5 plus year olds, this again, the percentage went up, which it should as you're saving those yearlings. But one state in Mississippi is amazing. 60% of that state's adult buck harvest are 3.5 or older, which is pretty amazing. So is this what QDM is all about? Not by any means. QDM is not saying at least get them out to that. This is just about protecting those yearlings, and then multiple years later down the road, just as this is the vast majority of this is voluntary by Mississippi sportsmen. All right, well, what has caused this change in this shift in this age structure? The big thing is it's just now people are passing yearling bucks. Where it used to be we shot every yearling or the very first yearling you couldn't get back to camp, people now are passing those and allowed them to at least reach one more age class. Now a lot of this is being directed by state agencies across the country, and you know what? The timing is perfect. It's perfectly coincided with the rise of what I call the modern deer hunter. Today's deer hunters are far more knowledgeable about deer hunting and management than any of our predecessors ever were. We have numerous educational opportunities available to learn more. State agencies do all kinds of educational opportunities. Conservation organizations do all kinds. So the average hunter today is just exposed to more information, has the ability to learn more about it. Today's hunter is more likely to practice QDMA and pass those young bucks, more likely to own land, and they're just more engaged in land management and wildlife conservation efforts. Which these are all very good things for the future of deer hunting and understanding what's going on and opportunities for state agencies to interact with the constituents. All right, well, this also obviously is a big rule with antler restrictions and what state agencies are implementing across the country. It wasn't that long ago that there were just a handful of states that did anything like this. Well, in 2008, there were 22 different states that had some form of antler restrictions within their state. Now, of these, 6 states had statewide restrictions, at least for one of the bucks in the bag limit. Well, 16 states used them in either a wildlife management area or a certain county or a state park or a military base. So at least there's a lot of experimentation going on. You know, when we talk about antler point restrictions a lot, but this wasn't just point restrictions. In fact, it was the majority of it was point restrictions. 15 of these states were, but 4 states had an antler spread restriction. It was mandated by the state agency. Not statewide, but in parts of the state. In 3 states, which you see in blue here, had combination restrictions, meaning hunters could either, the buck had to be a certain number of points or a certain spread, or in the case of Mississippi, a certain number of points, or meet a minimum inside spread, or have a minimum main beam length. So, you know, the combination approach where you can do a better job making sure you protect those yearlings while still making the majority of other bucks available for harvest. There are more progressive approaches than just a straight antler restriction. And from a biological standpoint, a lot more biologically sound than just a straight antler restriction. In addition, you have a lot of private and leased land people who employ age restrictions or harvesting based on body characteristics. And 11 states have buck programs. None of these are statewide programs. These were all practiced in at least a part or a portion of the state. And these are not implemented to protect bucks. You know, these are programs designed to increase the harvest of antlerless deer. They just had the indirect effect of also reducing buck harvest in some cases. And as Moret showed in Minnesota, it's likely a slight increase or a slight decrease, in the number of bucks that are harvested. But nonetheless, they do save a few bucks. So are these popular programs? In most places, they are very unpopular. There are not a whole lot of hunters that like earn buck programs. But are they successful in increasing antlerless harvest? They certainly can. So antler restrictions, are they necessary? In working for QDMA, we get this a lot. You know, you guys are just that antler restriction group. And that's clearly not at all what we're about, but we do talk about that a lot. So are they necessary? Well, there's 2 states surrounding Minnesota that both do a very good job protecting yearling bucks that neither have antler point restrictions. So the message here is that there's a lot of different ways that you can protect that yearling age class. You know, it doesn't have to be something that is mandated. Do antler restrictions work? They absolutely work when applied correctly. Pennsylvania is a perfect example of that. Missouri is, and Lonnie will talk about that later. But that's not the only way to do it. And as Lou showed, you know, is it the best way? In some cases, it absolutely is the best way. It's what hunters want the most. And that's one of the neatest things about working with deer in different states is that it's all different. You know, what's the hunting culture of Minnesota, the habitat of Minnesota is far different than other places in the country. So what that means is that your deer biologists have the opportunity to tailor something specific to this area. And you as sportsmen and women have a huge part in that. And the opportunity to interact with them and let them know what you do want with that and to pick something that will work best for you.